And I guess that's the bandwidth difference. Right, here we go then. Perspectives on child development. Learning outcomes. After reading this chapter, you will be able to identify different perspectives on child development, describe important features about how children grow, adapt, and change, illustrate what is unique about human childhood. Well, I'm glad that's in there, because that's what I'll add to my CV. Introduction. This book takes three main perspectives on child development: psychological, anthropological, and evolutionary. They each have their strengths and limitations, but by combining perspectives, we can gain a richer, more complete view of development. See figure 1.1. Key point. This book takes three main perspectives on child development: psychological, anthropological, and evolutionary. Let's take a closer look at each perspective in turn. 1.2. Perspective 1. Psychological. Most adults have an opinion about children, not least because every adult was a child once. Personal experience as a child or with other children can have a powerful influence on how we think about children, or even what we think childhood should be. The psychological perspective takes a different approach to this in several ways. First, it goes beyond a collection of anecdotes and personal observations. What do we mean by that? Well, we could try to create 2 billion explanations of child development, one for every child on Earth. That strategy doesn't seem very satisfactory because despite differences there, figure 1.1, different perspectives illuminate different facets of children's lives. Together, they provide a more complete understanding of child development. Image from Munafub and Smith, 2018. Source David Parkins. Are some things that are common to all children in the way they grow, adapt, and change. And these general patterns tell us something interesting about the way children develop. At the other extreme, we could try to find one grand, unifying explanation for the development of all children. Well, I suppose if all children on Earth were in education and everybody followed the Children's Rights Charter and each school actually did meet each child's requirements, we would have 2 billion bits of information. Children past, present and future in every aspect of their lives. That doesn't seem very sensible either, because it is hard to imagine one explanation that does justice to the diversity of childhood and the many ways in which children develop biologically, psychologically, socially, and culturally. So in practice, psychologists try to find a balance. Most scientists are trying to find the simplest way to explain as many facts as possible. Most psychologists are trying to find the simplest way to explain as much of human behavior as possible. The psychological approach describes something more general than what one individual experiences, but it also goes beyond what one individual could experience. For example, I have experience of my memories, but I don't experience how they work. This leads us to the second feature of psychological perspective of child development. It aims to be more than a description of the facts and to offer some casual explanation of why things are this way, rather than some other way they could have been. For example, say you want to compare the effect that reading from an e-book or a paper book has on children's memory. You give some children an ebook with non-fiction story and give some other children a paper fiction book. You then measure the memory ability of children in the ebook group and the paper book group and find a difference in performance. If you are interested in what causes what, there is an issue here. You haven't demonstrated that the difference in memory is because of the ebook or the paper book. I imagine because each child's ability is different. The things you are interested in, as you also give them different types of things to read as well. For whatever reason, non-fiction or fiction might engage children more, and that could explain the difference in memory performance instead. Now, imagine you control for the type of text children read and give them all fiction stories. You then measure memory ability between ebook and paperbook readers and find a difference again. The problem here is that two groups might have differed in their memory ability before you give them anything to read. Perhaps by chance one group was better at remembering to start with. Finally, you give all the children the same text and balance the memory ability of the groups before giving them the ebook or paperbook by giving them a memory check. Over several months of testing, you find that both groups improve equally in their memory. Case closed, not quite. Children's memory ability improves with age anyway, regardless of whether they read a paper book or an ebook. In this case, you need to show that the memory improved more than the children who received neither an ebook nor a paper book. As you can see, because the effect can be slippery things to pin down. Ultimately, there is no guarantee that the effect we are interested in is because of the cause we think it's due to. Despite the limitations of scientific method, we have developed vaccinations that have saved millions of lives, detected subatomic particles, and discovered structures of our own DNA. What scientists do is to try to rule out as many plausible alternative explanations as possible. For example, we can change one thing at a time, e.g. ebook or paperbook, but not fiction or non-fiction as well. Compare within and between the group variations, e.g. balance memory abilities between the groups, and compare one group to a control group, e.g. include a group children that received neither paperbook nor ebook. In general, scientists are obsessed with arguing over alternative explanations to explain the same set of observations because they care about cause and effect. That basically explains my idea in leadership for things like social services, where one social worker will talk about it and act upon it, whilst another social worker will write it down and file it away. And by doing that mix mashing that you just said in the book there about observing children in a psychological experiment, that's how you could improve in leadership, by doing both social workers without conferring with each other and corrupting each other. And by the time anything goes to court, you might have two different stories. Why would a psychologist want a better casual understanding of child development? Sometimes their motivation will be to improve the outcomes for children. For instance, an educational psychologist might want to design better learning environment in school, or a health psychologist might want to improve the well-being of children. In these situations, having a good understanding of cause and effect saves time and resources by targeting just that thing that brings about the biggest impact. Here's an example. Shoe size is associated with the reading ability. The larger the shoe size, the higher the reading ability. As both factors are also associated with age. Without a good understanding of cause and effect, we might incorrectly predict that giving children bigger shoes will cause them to read better. For other psychologists, their motivation for exploring cause and effect is the simplicity of wanting to know how something works, and finding out an answer is reward in itself. In both situations, building the best explanation is what matters. See box 1.1. Box 1.1. What makes a good explanation? Think about what makes a good explanation and have these criteria in mind as you read this book. A good explanation does the following. 1. Makes clear predictions that explain a pattern of results beyond the observable. It doesn't just restate the problem or provide another description of the facts. Well, this is exactly what I've been wanting, actually. Makes testable predictions that are risky or falsifiable. There is a clear sense of what evidence it should take to prove the idea wrong. That's good. So, like a risk assessment on that leadership technique, but not risk as in the risk, but what could be happening, what may not be happening. Offers a plausible mechanism for causation, the nuts and bolts of how cause gives rise to effect. So I suppose the context. Agrees with the explains findings from other areas of knowledge, for example, psychological explanations that are consistent and establish facts about evolution, biology, and anthropology. How qualified the person writing the stuff is and experienced. Interesting. I think I might have a new way of doing safeguarding meetings. Finally, the psychological approach aims to describe and explain the way things are, not necessarily the way things should be. For example, we might prefer it if children didn't lie, cheat, or harm one another, but they do. And if we want to change things for the better, however, we choose to define better, then it helps us to first understand the nature of the problem. This chapter begun by introducing some questions like, why does love matter? And how do children learn right from wrong? And before we move on, it is important not to lose sight of this sense of curiosity. If we already knew the answers to such questions, we wouldn't need to do the science to find them out. Science is not just an accumulation of facts, but a systematic way to approach the unknown. The scientific revolution of the 1500s was largely an admission of how little we understood, and we started to make progress after acknowledging we did not know the answers to some of the most important questions. In summary, a scientific approach to child development tries to build good explanations, box 1.1, paying special attention to the cause and effect and describing the best ways are not necessarily how they should be. Key points. Child psychology is a scientific study of how the mind, brain, and behavior change during childhood. Child psychologists want to understand how children grow, develop, and adapt to different points in their lives. The psychological perspective we took in this book typically focuses on a level of explanation between brain and behavior, although we frequently look up a level towards environmental issues, e.g. physical, social, and cultural, and down a level towards biology, e.g. genes and hormones, figure 1.2. Because we are interested in how children change, adapt, and grow, we also need to know how these levels relate to one another over time. Mastering any complex skill like walking or talking requires that more basic skills are required first. For example, a language development child start out babbling with individual sounds, then they put them together to form figure 1.2. The various levels of influence on an individual's development. Notice that the relations arrows between the levels go in both directions. Genes influence brains, that influence behavior, that influences environment, that influences which genes are turned on, that influence behavior, and so on. Within these nested relations, it is difficult to draw a neat line around what is nature or nurture, emphasizing that behavior emerges from a complex interaction between all levels, adapted from Gottlieb, 1992. First words, and then they join words together to form sentences. Then they use sentences to tell stories, hold conversations, and share complex ideas. It is extremely unlikely any child will produce fluent sentences from the start. So more generally, to fully understand how we use any complex skill that is significant to us as adults, we need to turn back the clock to when things began. For this reason, the book follows the journey of children as their skills are refined with experience and basic building blocks are assembled into more complex behavior and thinking. That reminds me to my second daughter. And while she was in the 9 months in the belly, she was always hearing the Glee advert. And as soon as she was a newborn baby, she was going, Glee! Glee! And I was like, wow, the first word is Glee. She's only just been born, literally. Children develop incrementally with later acquired skills built on earlier ones. The final take-home message about psychological perspectives is that development is not something that happens to children as if they were just passive recipients. They are active participants in constructing their own development and in shaping the environment around them. For example, children arrive with different temperaments, which are likely to bring about different responses from their caregivers, which in turn are likely to affect the way children behave in the future, and so on. Adults and children negotiate what parenting looks like in a never-ending cycle of interactions. So while it's true that children absorb a lot of information, they are not passive sponges. They generate new ideas and go beyond their own experiences. For instances, sometimes children will say, it wented that it goed over there, or I swimmed. These mistakes show that children cannot just be sponges soaking up whatever adults say, as no adults ever says these things. Instead, these examples show that children are finding patterns in their environment and going beyond their experiences, trying to figure out the rules adults play by. In this case, added when you talk about things in the past. The more general message is this: children are actively influencing the environments around them at the same time as the environment is influencing the children. Key point: children are active participants in their own development.